All right, buckle up because today we're taking a deep dive into some seriously mind-bending territory. We're going to be blurring the lines between cutting-edge physics and ancient wisdom. Maybe even a little bit of science fiction thrown in there, too.
It's amazing how those fields, really do seem to converge when you start digging deeper. When you talk about things like zero-point energy and consciousness, the lines between science and what some might call the unexplained really do start to get pretty blurry.
Absolutely. So let's kick things off with this whole zero-point energy thing. I've heard the term thrown around before, but I gotta admit, I'm still not entirely sure what it is.
Okay, sure. So think about this. Imagine you could cool everything down to absolute zero. The absolute coldest temperature possible. Now, zero-point energy is the energy that would still remain even at that extreme. It's like the universe's baseline hum. But here's where things get really interesting. Dan Winter, he argues that this energy doesn't actually collapse to zero as was initially thought.
Wait, so it's not actually zero-point energy then?
Exactly. Winter points out that instead of collapsing to zero, the energy collapses to something called the Planck threshold. And this threshold represents the smallest possible unit of energy that can exist, incredibly tiny, but with huge implications. Winter claims that the energy at this Planck threshold is converted into something completely different, longitudinal superluminal waves. You might know them better as gravity waves.
Okay, hold on. Gravity waves. We talking about the ripples in space-time that Einstein predicted.
That's right. Now, the idea that zero-point energy could be the source of gravity waves is a pretty radical concept, I'll admit that. And not everyone in the scientific community agrees with Winter's interpretation. But if he's right, it means that there's this vast, untapped energy source all around us, just waiting to be harnessed.
That is seriously mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So how do we tap into this energy? Is there, like, a special device? A gadget? What is it?
Well, according to Winter, location is key. He actually compares it to ancient pyramids, suggesting that they were strategically placed on these nodes of Earth's energy grid. And he believes that these nodes are where this vacuum energy is concentrated.
So are we saying that the placement of these ancient structures, they were actually based on some understanding of zero-point energy, that some locations on Earth are like energy hotspots?
It's a fascinating idea, isn't it? Winter's theory is that being on these nodes could give you access to this huge amount of energy. And this kind of brings us to Elizabeth Donovan's work on propulsion. You mentioned earlier that she focuses on what she calls suppressed technologies, right?
Yeah, let's talk about that. What exactly are suppressed technologies, and how do they relate to this whole energy thing?
Donovan argues that throughout history, certain scientific discoveries, inventions even, have been deliberately suppressed, often because they threaten the existing power structures or challenge the established scientific paradigms. One of the technologies she talks about is this device called the Deciphered device, specifically the Type 1 thruster.
What's so special about this Deciphered device? Does it actually work?
Well, that's where things get a bit more complicated. Donovan explains that the device creates a differential in charge, which she describes as a curvature in time. And she believes that this curvature in time can actually be used as a form of propulsion.
Wait, hold on. Are we talking time travel here?
Not exactly. Think of it more like manipulating the fabric of space-time itself to create movement. It's kind of like, imagine you have a rubber mat and you drag it across a surface. The wrinkles and folds in the mat, those represent the curvature of space-time. And this curvature, she thinks it can be used to propel an object forward.
That's a pretty wild analogy. So instead of pushing against something like a rocket does, we're talking about like bending space and time to move through it.
Exactly. And she compares it to a bunch of other concepts. One is this thing called the EM drive. You might have heard of it. It's this controversial technology that's supposed to generate thrust without propellant, using microwaves bouncing around in this specially shaped chamber.
I think I read about that. Scientists are still debating if it actually works or not. But how does it relate to zero-point energy?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. Donovan's work suggests that by understanding and manipulating this curvature in time, we might be able to tap into the energy of the vacuum, maybe even accessing that zero-point energy we were talking about.
So spaceships powered by zero-point energy, zipping around the galaxy, Star Trek stuff.
It might sound like science fiction, I know, but the theoretical framework is it's there. If we can harness this energy, the possibilities really are pretty much limitless. It's not just about the technology, though. This is where the conversation takes an even more mind-bending turn, because both Winter and Donovan bring up this concept of consciousness.
Okay, now we're going down the rabbit hole. How does consciousness fit into all of this?
Well, Winter talks about something he calls inhabiting the array. It's a complex idea, but essentially he's saying that our consciousness, our very being, is connected to this vast energy field that permeates the universe.
So we're all part of, like, some kind of universal consciousness, a cosmic mind. Is that it?
That's one way to think about it. He connects this to things like lucid dreaming and even the concept of rapture. He's suggesting that these experiences might be glimpses into a deeper level of reality, where our consciousness can access and interact with this energy field in a more direct way.
So you're saying that these mystical experiences might actually have a basis in physics, that they're not just, hallucinations or wishful thinking.
Exactly. And this is where Winter brings up another fascinating point. He suggests that the physics of inhabiting the array, of tapping into this energy field without becoming unstable, is related to the concept of spin.
Spin, like a spinning top.
Not quite. He's talking about a more fundamental kind of spin, a kind of internal coherence or alignment within our own energy field.
So we need to master our own internal spin to access this higher level of consciousness.
That's a great way to put it. He actually compares it to the Sufi practice of spinning, which is used as a spiritual practice to reach a state of heightened awareness.
Yeah.
And he suggests that the physics behind this practice might be related to the way we interact with this universal energy field.
Okay, this is a lot to process. So our consciousness is like an energy field that interacts with the energy of the universe.
That's the basic idea. And Donovan, she adds another layer to this by bringing in this concept of plasma intelligence.
Plasma intelligence. What in the world is that?
Well, you know how plasma is often called the fourth state of matter? Basically a superheated gas where the electrons have been stripped away from the atoms.
Yeah, like what you see in lightning or the northern lights, right?
Exactly. But Donovan, she believes that plasma might be more than just a state of matter. She suggests that under the right conditions, plasma can exhibit a form of intelligence.
Wait, you mean like lightning is intelligent?
Well, maybe not lightning itself, but she talks about plasma as being capable of forming these complex structures and patterns, almost like it's organizing itself.
So it's not conscious, like how we think of it, but it's showing signs of complexity and organization.
Right. And she specifically mentions high dielectric materials being important in this context.
High dielectric materials, what are those?
They're materials that are really good at storing electrical energy, things like ceramics or certain types of crystals.
Okay, so what do these materials have to do with plasma intelligence?
Donovan suggests that these high dielectric materials can enhance the intelligence of the plasma, almost like they're giving it a boost. And she even shares a personal anecdote about this softball-sized orb of plasma that followed her around the lab.
Wait, a plasma orb that followed her? It was sentient.
She called it her plasma pet. Now, whether or not it was truly sentient is up for debate, but it definitely raises some fascinating questions about the nature of intelligence and whether it might exist in forms that we haven't even considered.
That's pretty wild. So are we saying that the difference between a machine and a living being, a conscious being even, might come down to its ability to interact with this plasma intelligence?
It's a thought-provoking idea, right? And it brings us back to Donovan's concerns about suppressed technologies. She argues that by limiting our understanding of electromagnetism, we've essentially blinded ourselves to a whole realm of possibilities.
She specifically mentioned heaviside simplification of Maxwell's equations, right?
Exactly. Maxwell's equations are the foundation of our understanding of electromagnetism. But Heaviside simplified them, took out the parts that dealt with gravity and higher dimensions.
So you're saying those missing parts are actually crucial to understanding things like zero-point energy and consciousness, and maybe even these suppressed technologies.
That's what Donovan and Winter are suggesting. They believe that by rediscovering these missing pieces, we can unlock this whole new world of understanding and potential.
This is all pretty mind-blowing. It sounds like we're on the verge of this major paradigm shift in our understanding of the universe and our place in it.
It does feel that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If these ideas are even partially correct, the implications are, they're staggering.
Definitely a lot to think about. Maybe we should pause here and pick up this conversation in part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds good to me. We've just scratched the surface of these fascinating topics. There's so much more to explore.
Okay, let's dive back into this incredible conversation with Dan Winter and Elizabeth Donovan. We're exploring some seriously mind-bending ideas about energy, consciousness, and what might be possible if we challenge the limits of conventional science.
Yeah, one of the most intriguing threads running through all of this is the idea that we might have way more power to shape reality than we think. than we realize.
Yeah, that really stuck with me from the first part of our deep dive, this idea of, what was it, inhabiting the array, that our consciousness isn't just some passive observer, but it can interact with and even influence this universal energy field.
That's it. Winter argues that by achieving a certain level of internal coherence, kind of like an alignment of our energy, we can tap into this field in a more powerful and deliberate way.
And he even compared it to things like lucid dreaming and the concept of rapture, right? Suggesting that these experiences aren't just, mystical woo-woo, but they might actually have a basis in physics.
Exactly. He's suggesting that the same principles of implosive charge collapse that govern the formation of stars and galaxies, they're also at play within our own consciousness.
Okay, that sounds pretty abstract. What does implosive charge collapse actually mean in this context?
Imagine a swirling vortex of energy, like a mini black hole, where energy is converging and collapsing inward. Winter argues that this process of implosion, that's what creates order and structure in the universe, and that it's also happening at a subatomic level within our own bodies and minds.
So are we saying that we have the potential to create our own little black holes of consciousness?
Well, maybe not literally. But the idea is that by mastering this art of perfect charge collapse within ourselves, we can access higher states of consciousness, potentially even influence the fabric of reality itself.
How do we do that, though? Is there like a step-by-step guide to mastering implosive charge collapse?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Winter points to these ancient wisdom traditions, like the Sufi practice of spinning, as examples of techniques that have been used to cultivate this internal coherence.
So it's not just about understanding the physics, but it's also about developing these internal practices that allow us to kind of embody these principles.
Exactly. And Donovan, she adds another layer to this whole discussion with her insights into plasma intelligence. Remember her story about the plasma pet that followed her in the lab?
Yeah, that was pretty wild. Do you think it was actually intelligent, or was it just some weird electromagnetic anomaly? It was just a ball of plasma, right?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely raises this possibility that intelligence might not be confined to just biological organisms. What if plasma itself, under the right conditions, could exhibit some kind of consciousness and maybe even interact with our consciousness?
I'm trying to wrap my head around that. But if it's true, it would completely revolutionize how we understand the universe and our place in it.
Absolutely. And it ties back to Donovan's concerns about suppressed technologies. If we're working with like an incomplete understanding of electromagnetism, we might be missing out on entire realms of knowledge and possibility, including the true nature of consciousness itself.
She specifically mentioned Heaviside simplification of Maxwell's equations. How did that limit our understanding?
Well, Maxwell's equations, they're our fundamental description of how electricity and magnetism work. But Heaviside, he simplified them, took out the parts that dealt with gravity and higher dimensions.
And why was that a problem?
Think of it like trying to understand a three-dimensional object by only looking at its two-dimensional shadow. You're missing a whole dimension of information. By removing the gravitational and higher dimensional aspects, Heaviside kind of boxed us into this limited framework for understanding electromagnetism.
So we're missing the full picture. What if those missing dimensions hold the key to unlocking, the secrets of zero-point energy and consciousness, and maybe even faster than light travel?
That's exactly what Donovan and Winter are suggesting. They believe that by rediscovering these suppressed aspects of physics, we could open up a whole new world of possibilities.
But if these ideas are so revolutionary, why have they been suppressed for so long? Who benefits from keeping this knowledge hidden?
That's a complex question, and it's one that Donovan really grapples with in her work. It's worth considering the implications of a world where, free energy and advanced healing technologies, even interstellar travel, they become commonplace.
Yeah, I can imagine those in power wouldn't be too thrilled about that. It would completely upend the status quo.
Exactly. Think about it. Control of energy and technology is one of the primary sources of power in our world. If these suppressed technologies were to become, widely known, it would fundamentally shift the balance of power.
But isn't it impossible to keep these things hidden forever, especially with the internet and the free flow of information nowadays?
It's definitely getting harder, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
And that's where the power of collective consciousness comes in. If enough people become aware of these ideas, they embrace these new paradigms. It could create a tipping point that leads to a fundamental transformation of society.
So it's not just about a few brilliant scientists making breakthroughs in a lab. It's about a shift in consciousness, a collective awakening to these to these new possibilities.
Exactly. And that's where each of us has a role to play. By just engaging with these ideas, by sharing them, by questioning the existing paradigms, we can help to create the conditions for this transformation to happen.
So what you're saying is the future isn't something that just happens to us, but something we actively create through our thoughts, our beliefs, and our actions.
Precisely. And by aligning our consciousness with the principles of harmony, coherence, and interconnectedness, we can co-create a future that's both empowering and liberating.
It's like realizing we're not separate from the universe, but rather an integral part of its unfolding tapestry. And that by aligning ourselves with its underlying principles, we can tap into this source of wisdom and power and creativity that knows no bounds.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it leads us to another fascinating question. What if the technologies we've been seeking outside of ourselves are actually latent within our own being, just waiting to be unlocked?
Instead of looking for aliens out there, maybe we should be looking for the extraterrestrial within.
Exactly. Perhaps the true journey of discovery lies not in exploring the vastness of space, but in delving into the infinite depths of our own consciousness.
Wow, this conversation is getting deep. Maybe we need a moment to let all of this sink in before we continue.
I agree. Let's pause here and pick up this exploration in part 3 of our deep dive. We'll delve even further into the connections between ancient wisdom, suppressed technologies, and the untapped potential of human consciousness.
All right, I think I finally caught my breath after that last mind-blowing discussion. We're back with part 3 of our deep dive into the world of suppressed technologies and zero-point energy and the potential of human consciousness.
It's a lot to take in, I know. They really are ideas that challenge our fundamental assumptions about reality and, what's possible.
For sure. In the last part, we were talking about the idea that we might be working with this limited and incomplete understanding of the universe, all because certain scientific ideas have been suppressed.
Right. Elizabeth Donovan specifically talked about the way Maxwell's equations were manipulated, how elements relating to gravity and higher dimensions were deliberately taken out, and this basically stripped away a lot of the power and the potential of electromagnetism.
So are we saying that because of this, we've been misled to believe that things like free energy and anti-gravity propulsion and instantaneous communication are just fantasies?
It's certainly possible. Donovan argues that these concepts, which seem impossible in the framework of conventional physics, might actually be completely achievable if we just had a more complete understanding of electromagnetism.
It's like exploring a huge uncharted continent, but we've been given a map that only shows a tiny little portion of it. We've been led to believe that the rest of the continent doesn't even exist. But what if it's just, hidden from view?
Exactly. And just like explorers in the past, they ventured beyond the known world. They discovered new lands. We need pioneers in science and in consciousness to explore these uncharted territories of physics and of reality. People who aren't afraid to challenge the status quo and push the boundaries of what we think is possible.
People like Dan Winter and Elizabeth Donovan.
Absolutely. Winter, with his work on the geometry of energy, he proposes that there's this deeper order to the universe. A kind of sacred geometry that underlies everything, from the formation of galaxies to the structure of our DNA.
And Donovan, with her expertise in suppressed technologies, she's shining a light on this hidden history of scientific breakthroughs that have been deliberately buried.
Together, they paint this compelling picture of a reality that's way more interconnected and fluid than we've been led to believe. A reality where we're not just passive observers, but active participants in the universe. And we can actually influence the very fabric of the universe through our thoughts and beliefs and intentions.
That's a powerful concept. Are we really saying that we have the power to shape reality with our minds? That sounds like something out of a superhero movie.
It might sound fantastical, but there's growing evidence from fields like quantum physics and consciousness research that our minds have a measurable impact on the world around us. Winter believes that consciousness itself is a form of energy. And by aligning our internal energy with this universal energy field, we can tap into an incredible source of power and creativity.
He even connected it to lucid dreaming. Is he saying we can consciously create our reality just like we can control our dreams?
It is an interesting parallel. In a lucid dream, you become aware that you're dreaming, and you can consciously influence the dream environment. So what if we could apply that same level of awareness and attention to our waking lives.
That's mind-blowing. It suggests that we have a much greater degree of control over our lives
Or
and our destinies than we realize. And if we can do that, what about the other things Donovan was talking about, like healing ourselves or even transcending our physical limitations?
definitely possibilities worth exploring. And it comes back to Donovan's concerns about suppressed technologies. What if the most powerful technologies aren't external gadgets, but are internal abilities that we've had all along?
Yeah.
Abilities that have been dormant for millennia, maybe because we've been conditioned to believe they're impossible.
So instead of searching for answers and solutions outside of ourselves, maybe we need to be looking inward, exploring the vast untapped potential of our own consciousness.
That's really what this whole deep dive has been about, recognizing that we're not limited by the constraints of conventional physics, but empowered by the infinite possibilities of what some call the quantum realm, a realm where consciousness interacts with matter and energy in ways we're only beginning to understand.
It's about remembering that we're not separate from the universe, but we're an integral part of its incredible unfolding.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, by aligning ourselves with these underlying principles of harmony and coherence and interconnectedness, we can tap into a source of wisdom and power and creativity that has no limits.
That's truly inspiring. If we could access that potential, who knows what we could achieve as individuals and as a species.
The possibilities they really are endless. It's like we're standing on the threshold of this new era, a new understanding of what it even means to be human, an era where we recognize our inherent power to change reality and co-create a future that reflects our highest aspirations.
Wow, that's a powerful message. It sounds like we're being called to step into our full potential, both as individuals and as a collective.
We are. The universe is calling us to awaken to our true nature, to embrace the mystery and the wonder that surrounds us, and to step boldly into the unknown.
This has been an incredible journey, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, I really encourage you to explore these ideas further and see where your own journey of discovery leads you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.